Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world where bedtime wasn't the end of the day, it was the beginning of terror. You shuffle across creaky wooden floorboards in a stone cottage that smells faintly of damp hay and boiled cabbage. In your hand is a stubby candle that spits and dances with every draft. Shadows jump like frightened rats across the walls. The night outside isn't quiet, it's silent in a way that feels too heavy. You hold your breath, because you think you hear a whisper, but it's probably just the wind. Probably. By the way, you probably won't survive this night. Or at least, you'll definitely lose some sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge to bed in the dim glow of a tallow candle. It smells awful like smoky meat and sheet fat, because that's basically what it is. Candles in the Middle Ages weren't fancy beeswax jobs unless you were rich or a bishop. For most people, lighting a candle was a smelly, flickering luxury. It barely lit a few feet in front of you, and the shadows it cast weren't soft, they were jagged and twitchy. Like they had plans. Oil lamps weren't much better. They were messy, smoky, and required fuel that might have been used for cooking instead. You might have a rushlight, basically a piece of dried reed dipped in animal fat, but those burned faster than your nerves. The darkness wasn't just inconvenient, it was terrifying. It was the realm of things you couldn't name without inviting them in. No electricity, no streetlights, no soft LED glow from your phone screen. Once the sun set, your world shrank to a tiny bubble of wavering light, and beyond it, well, beyond it was where they lived. Who they were exactly depended on. Who you asked. But rest assured, everyone had a theory. Even animals seemed spooked by the dark. Horses wouldn't enter unlit stables, dogs whimpered more, and cats, those furry, twitchy familiars, stared into corners with unsettling intensity. And when your only defense against the dark is a lump of wax and a prayer to Saint Michael, you start sleeping with one eye open. Historians still argue whether this fear of the dark was more psychological or practical. Is it truly superstition, or just a logical reaction to an environment filled with hazards? One thing is certain, in the absence of light, medieval imaginations lit up like bonfires. People hung charms near doors and windows. They painted tiny crosses above their beds, muttered protective prayers, or just refused to go outside after sunset unless absolutely necessary. In fact, it was common for villages to enforce curfews, a kind with actual bells to keep people safe, or at least keep them inside. And it wasn't just what might be in the darkness that scared folks. It was what the dark might do to you. They believed the soul was more vulnerable at night, especially during sleep. So if you forgot to say your prayers or used a candle made from the wrong kind of fat, well, you might wake up different. Or not at all. Ironically, the darkness outside wasn't always the scariest part. It was the little patch of light you carried with you. Because anything could be lurking just outside that glowing circle, and if something stepped in, you'd see it too late. Your candle stutters. You freeze. Was that a draft or a breath? No. Just the wind. Totally. You pull your wool blanket higher, but it doesn't help much when every noise outside feels like it has teeth. A low howl echoes from the tree line. You pause mid-chew of your stale barley bread, staring at the window because that wasn't the wind. In the Middle Ages, nature wasn't a pastoral painting. It was a predator. And the night, that's when the predators clocked in for their shit. Wolves were the headliners, roaming in packs through the forests that surrounded just about every village. These weren't metaphorical wolves or misunderstood fairy tale companions. These were very real. Very hungry animals that viewed wandering humans as walking lunch meat. And it wasn't just wolves. Bears, wild boars, lynxes. Europe had lynxes are common dangers, especially on the edges of civilization. If you had to travel at night, you didn't go alone. And you didn't go quietly. People carried torches not just for light but for protection. Bright, fiery, smoke-belching torches. Because if the creatures didn't get you, the superstition might. A single growl in the distance could ruin your entire sleep schedule. Parents told their kids tales of beast men and shapeshifters, partly to entertain, mostly to keep them from sneaking out after dark. You might think that sounds a little dramatic until you realize medieval Europe had a werewolf problem. Not the teenager with abs kind. The real, panic-inducing, trial-by-church kind. Historians still argue whether these werewolf legends arose from genuine sightings, psychological mass hysteria, or just a convenient way to get rid of your least favorite neighbor. Regardless, the fear was real. Some regions had legal processes to prosecute suspected werewolves. Imagine being a farmer who's already exhausted from planting oats all day, then you have to defend yourself in court because your beard looks suspicious and someone's sheep went missing. And let's not forget the woods themselves. Forests weren't peaceful places to pick mushrooms. They were dense, dark labyrinths filled with sounds you couldn't identify and eyes you couldn't see. Nightfall in a forest was like being blindfolded and dropped into a lion's den, but colder and with more branches slapping your face. People even avoided certain paths after dusk, not just out of fear of animals, but because some places were said to be cursed or haunted by ghostly hounds. The Wild Hunt was one such legend, a spectral hunting party, galloping through the sky at night, led by a dark figure, sometimes the devil himself, other times just a really angry king. To see the Wild Hunt was a very bad omen. To hear it, well, good luck explaining why you've gone completely pale and are now holding your bread upside down. But not all threats were so grand. Even something like a squeaky barn hinge or creaky fence post could spark panic. After all, you didn't have security cameras or motion sensor lights. If something made a sound in the night, you got a lantern in hand, part pounding, and hoped it was the wind. Or the pig. Or literally anything that wouldn't maul you. There's one account from a 14th century diary where a man recorded hearing devilish scuffling near his livestock shed. He went to investigate and came face to face with a hedgehog, which, in fairness, could also be seen as a dark omen depending on the village. And depending on the hedgehog. You lie back in your straw mattress and listen. The wind brushes against the wooden shutters. It groans, almost a howl. Or a moan. You're not sure anymore. Your candle is almost out. The room dims. Just as your eyes adjust, you hear a rustle from the thatch roof above. You freeze, certain that it's either a cat, a demon, or worse, a confused raccoon with ambitions. You want to get up and check. But do you really want to meet what's out there? Nah. Better to pull the blanket tighter and pretend the rustling is just ambience. You finally begin to drift off, your heartbeat easing when something presses down on your chest. You can't move. You can't breathe. You try to scream, but your lips won't part. And just before panic takes full control, the weight disappears. Sleep paralysis, we call it now. But in the Middle Ages, that was a demon. A real one. Possibly named incubus or succubus, depending on the mood. People back then didn't call it a sleep disorder. They called it night visitations. According to a whole host of medieval texts, from medical treatises to exorcism manuals, what you just experienced wasn't your body misfiring between REM stages. No, it was a demon sitting on your chest, whispering blasphemy into your ears and trying to steal your breath or other things, which we'll leave politely ambiguous for -13 reasons. There's an illustration in a 15th century manuscript that shows a grotesque little creature squatting on a sleeping man's ribs, grinning while the poor guy looks half dead. Fun bedtime material for scribes and monks. And these weren't just fringe beliefs. Doctors, priests, and scholars took this stuff seriously. If you complained about nighttime attacks, you'd be told to pray harder, sleep with a relic under your pillow, or even get sprinkled with holy water before bed. Or, if you were really unlucky, you'd be diagnosed with melancholic humors and prescribed leeches. Historians still argue whether these demon visitations were seen as punishment for sin, symptoms of illness, or part of the larger fear that night opened a gateway to the infernal. Either way, sleep was no longer a gentle escape. It was a dangerous transition, where you might be spiritually attacked because you let your guard down. And it didn't stop at chest-sitting imps. There were tales of the Maria phantom that would ride your back, tangle your hair, and drain your energy. Yes, that's where the word nightmare comes from. Not bad dreams. Bad in titties. Some folks even thought witches sent their spirits out at night to torment people while their bodies stayed asleep in bed like astral projection, but with more hexes and fewer yoga mats. One woman in Bohemia confessed under duress that she would float as smoke through the village and press on people's chests at night, just to watch them struggle. That was considered sorcery, and it didn't end well for her. Surprise. You might think these were isolated fears, but many cultures had similar stories. The Norse had the Mara, the Slavs had the Nafka, and even the English had Old Hag Syndrome, the idea that an invisible crone would sit on your chest and steal your breath. The scary part. These legends pop up in places that had no contact with each other. Kinda makes you wonder anyway. Back in your medieval cottage, you clutch a wooden rosary and whisper a prayer you half remembered from mass. Just in case. The candle finally dies out, and your world turns completely black. You can't even see your hand. Which is fine. Until you feel something brush that hand. You flinch. Nothing. You must be imagining things. Right. You fumble beneath your straw-stuffed mattress and grab a small, worn char, maybe a scrap of parchment with a saint's name, or a sliver of bone someone swore came from St. Blaise's pinky. It's probably fate. But you're keeping it anyway. Better safe than spiritually smothered. The church bell tolls midnight. You jolt upright, because nothing good ever happens when bells ring at this hour. This isn't your average oops, I forgot to set my alarm chime. This is the kind of sound that makes villagers cross themselves in unison and mutter God preserve us with quivering lips. Welcome to the witching hour, that ominous stretch between midnight and 3 a.m. When the boundary between this world and the next supposedly thins to a whisper. During this time, witches were believed to be most powerful. And tonight, you're sure you heard chanting in the wind. The idea wasn't just folklore, it was theology. Church authorities claimed that witches could only perform their most potent rituals under the cloak of night, far from the eyes of honest folk and holy men. If someone was found wandering at this hour, suspicious. If they were also a widow with a cat and an herb garden, practically guilty. Many believe that witches held midnight Sabbath secret gatherings in forests or top hills, where they danced around bonfires, cooked potions in cauldrons real ones, not Halloween props, and worshipped the devil himself, who may or may not have shown up in goat form. Honestly, a little on the nose. But while these tales may sound like medieval fan fiction, the fear was real. Entire communities lived in constant suspicion of each other. Historians still argue whether these stories were fueled by actual pagan rituals, pure invention, or just a convenient way to get rid of that neighbor who borrowed your sickle and never returned it. You, meanwhile, are suddenly remembering that your neighbor Agnes has 3 cats. And last week, your cow got sick after she looked at it funny. You'd never accuse her, of course, but maybe you should sprinkle some salt under your window just in case. It was common to sleep with a knife or iron object under the pillow, iron being thought to ward off witches and spirits alike. Some even painted hex marks above doorways, or carved protective symbols into the wooden beams of their homes. In certain parts of Europe, folks sealed jars with fingernail clippings, hair, and pins, then buried them under their thresholds to trap incoming curses. Practical? Maybe not. Thorough? Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just magic that people feared, it was night itself as a kind of living force. You'd hear sayings like the devil walks at midnight or evil rides on the wind, passed down through generations, whispered into the ears of children who then passed them on in shaky voices. And the animals. They always knew first. Roosters crowing at odd hours were said to be warning of spiritual unrest. A dog howling in the dark. Someone was going to die. A cat staring at the corner of your cottage with wide eyes. Well, you were probably already cursed. You sit on the edge of your creaky straw mattress, listening. No chanting now. No cats screeching. Just the occasional hoot of an owl. You start to relax until you remember that owls, too, were considered witches in disguise. So now you're back to square one. The bell tolls. Again. 12 strikes. Or was that 13? You don't want to know. You lie back down, pull the blanket over your head, and pray that witches have better things to do tonight than bother you. You stare at the wooden beam above your head, barely visible in the dark. A flicker of moonlight sneaks through the shutter cracks and glints off the metal crucifix nailed to the wall. You feel a bit safer, but only just. In the Middle Ages, faith wasn't just personal, it was defensive architecture. Your home was a spiritual battleground, and the walls were the first line of resistance. Saints were drafted like generals. Icons were posted like sentries. Even if you didn't fully understand the Latin prayers, you said them. Loudly. Repeatedly. Just in case someone or something was listening. But holy symbols alone didn't always cut it. People hedged their bets. They hung bundles of herbs, rosemary, sage, St. John's wort over doorways, or tucked them into bed sheets. Not for the smell, though medieval hygiene standards meant any scent was an upgrade. These herbs were thought to keep out spirits, demons, and especially witches. Garlic wasn't just for cooking. It was armor. And that little iron horseshoe above the door. You didn't nail it up for good luck. You nailed it up so demons wouldn't cross the threshold. Iron was thought to confuse dark forces. Which seems both weirdly specific and kind of rude. What if the demon was actually very clever? But logic wasn't the point. Protection was. Sometimes, families would even burn old shoes in the fireplace to keep malevolent spirits out of the chimney. And if that sounds like a cozy tradition, let's just remember, these were well-worn, sweaty, 12th century shoes. The only thing worse than a ghost at your hearth was the smell of father's leather boots going up in flames. Historians still argue whether this blend of Christian and folk practices was encouraged by the church or merely tolerated to keep people calm. Some clergy turned a blind eye to pagan leftovers in the belief that scared villagers were more obedient. Others actively condemned it, but good luck prying a silver amulet out of a superstitious peasant's hands. You glance toward the small alcove carved into the wall of your family's humble icon corner. There's a tiny wooden Madonna, a palm cross from Easter, and a dried-out twig someone swears came from a saint's walking stick. You're not convinced. It looks like part of the fence. Still, tonight, you mumble a prayer toward that corner. The moon shifts. The glint on the crucifix fades. The darkness moves in again. It's not just the shadows that unnerve you, it's the stillness they bring. In daylight, life bustles, carts rattle, children shout, chickens shriek like tiny dinosaurs. But now, no noise at all. Just the crack of wood cooling, the rustle of something brushing the outer wall, and the thump of your own heartbeat. They say devils prefer silence. That's why monks chant all day. You wonder if you should start humming. Instead, you roll over and face the wall, as if turning your back on the night will make it disappear. A risky move, sure. But maybe, just maybe, it's better not to know what's behind you. The graveyard lies just beyond the garden fencey patch of uneven earth with crooked crosses, and names barely legible in the moonlight. You remember your mother's warning, don't wander near after dark. Some souls don't rest easy, especially if their bodies weren't laid to rest properly. You shiver, imagining restless spirits rising from those cold graves, their fingers clawing at the earth as if trying to escape the silence of death. It wasn't just superstition. People believed the dead could return sometimes as harmless ghosts, sometimes as malevolent revenants seeking revenge or sustenance. The medieval dead were not always granted peaceful rest. If someone died suddenly, violently, or without proper rites, their soul was thought to linger. Even worse were those who were buried outside. Consecrated ground criminals, suicides, and unbaptized infants. These souls were often feared as restless, wandering in limbo between life and the afterlife. Stories abounded of bodies rising at night, sometimes even dragging neighbors back into the graveyard. To protect themselves, villagers sometimes drove stakes through corpses, burned the hearts of suspected revenants, or sprinkled holy salt around the property. Not exactly what you want to think about as you try to sleep. In some regions, there was a practice of watching the corpse for several nights, sometimes with candles burning nearby to ensure the soul departed safely. Imagine sitting through that, with only flickering candlelight, and the occasional creak of the coffin to keep you company. The church tried to control these fears by establishing strict burial rites and consecrated cemeteries, but that didn't stop the rumors. People whispered about ghoul creatures that dug up graves to feast on the dead. Others claimed witches could raise corpses to do their bidding. Historians still argue whether these tales were exaggerations born of ignorance or reflections of actual phenomena, like diseases causing the dead to appear alive. Either way, the fear of the graveyard at night was a powerful deterrent. You remember the old saying your grandmother used to repeat, "Better a graveyard by day than a wilderness by night." Wise words, especially when the shadows around you seem to twitch and stretch like they might come alive. You pull the blanket tighter and pray that your own resting place will be peaceful someday, wherever and whenever that may be. But for now, the graveyard is just a fence away, and the dead may be closer than you think. The village is mostly quiet now, but you notice a flicker of light down the lane. Someone is moving around after dark, which is suspicious, to say the least. Who could it be? The baker finishing his last batch. The midwife called out for an emergency. Or perhaps the night watchman pacing the streets, his lantern bobbing like a ghostly will-o'-the-wisp. Nocturnal activity was rare, and often eyed with suspicion in medieval times. Villagers were wary of anyone wandering after sunset, especially if they didn't have a clear reason. After all, night was when thieves, murderers, and of course witches chose to strike. The baker might be baking bread at odd hours, but people whispered that sometimes the oven's heat was used for less savory purposes like concocting potions or hiding stolen goods. Midwives, vile though they were, sometimes faced accusations of witchcraft, especially if a birth went wrong or a child didn't survive. The night watchman, whose job was to keep the peace, was often regarded as a figure of both authority and fear. His presence was necessary, but his motives could be questioned. Was he protecting the town, or was he an opportunist ready to shake down a drunk for coin? Some believed that people out at night were under the influence of dark forces or involved in secret, sinister gatherings. After all, how else to explain why someone would risk the dangers of the dark unless they had something to hide? In towns with more advanced night watches, the watchman's job was a serious one, ranging from calling out the hours, guarding against fires, and deterring criminals. But his voice, booming in the silent streets with cries of all's well, could also startle and unsettle those trying to sleep. You wonder whether the watchman's booming presence is reassuring or just another layer of nighttime anxiety. Historians still debate how effective these early night watches really were. Did they genuinely keep towns safer, or did their loud cries merely heighten the eerie atmosphere? Maybe a bit of both. Tonight, as you lie in bed, you strain your ears for the watchman's call. When it finally comes, a muffled voice echoes down the lane, "All's well." It's meant to soothe, but instead, it makes you wonder what if it is it. You don't dare get up to check. You just pull the blanket up and hope the night keeps its promises. You're not sleeping alone tonight. You share a bed with your siblings, maybe even your grandmother and the neighbor's cousin. It's cramped, noisy, and smells like a mix of sweat, hay, and last week's cabbage stew. But hey, there's safety in numbers. Sleeping in groups wasn't just a cultural quirk, it was practical. Medieval homes were small, and the cold was ruthless. Huddling together kept bodies warm and, more importantly, helped keep the things that go bump in the night at bay. The more bodies, the harder it was for demons, witches, or restless spirits to single you out. This closeness came with its own problems. You jostle for space, someone snores like a bear, and your little cousin won't stop kicking you in the ribs. But you accept the chaos because, frankly, it beats being alone and vulnerable. Families might even share blankets and sleep in shifts, especially during the coldest months. Some believed that sleeping too soundly or too deeply was dangerous. You needed to remain alert to the spiritual dangers lurking in the shadows. Falling into a deep sleep meant opening yourself to attack. You might also be surrounded by charms and holy relics tucked under pillows or sewn into clothing. Sometimes, small bones or teeth of saints were believed to protect sleepers from harm. It sounds odd to modern ears, but to medieval folk, those were the equivalent of modern security systems. Historians still argue whether this communal sleeping was primarily for warmth, protection, or simply because space was limited. But everyone agrees, it was better than braving the night alone. You nudge your brother, who's snoring loudly enough to wake the dead. You remind yourself not to kick back, he's your only buffer against the night. Besides, if he's snoring, it means he's alive and well. For now. You tuck your chin in, trying to find a comfortable spot between the cold wooden wall and the lumpiest straw mattress known to humankind. Sleep, when it comes, is fragmented, broken by dreams of shadows, sudden noises, and the occasional snort from your cousin. But it's sleep nonetheless. And in the Middle Ages, that was something of a victory. Suddenly, a distant bell rings. Not a gentle, soothing chime, but a loud, urgent clang that echoes through the village streets. Your heart skips. That bell isn't good news. In medieval times, church bells weren't just for calling people to mass. They were the village's alarm system. If the bell rang after sunset, it could mean fire, invasion, or worse, thieves breaking into homes. The bell was a summons to action, a desperate call for everyone to awake and defend what they had. You know what it means, the village is under threat. Maybe the forest bandits have come, or a fire is swallowing the farmlands. Or perhaps, as whispered in fearful tones, the dead are rising. People believe the ringing bells could also repel evil spirits. The tolling pierced the night's silence, breaking spells and scaring away demons lurking just beyond the walls. Bells were even rung during exorcisms to expel devils from the afflicted. But a ringing bell in the dark also stirred panic. Children screamed, dogs barked madly, and adults scrambled to find their weapons or at least a sturdy stick. Historians still debate whether the ringing of bells truly kept evil at bay or simply heightened the anxiety of an already terrified population. One thing's for sure, those bells shaped the rhythm of medieval nights. You clutch your blanket, listening to the fading bell tolls. Your mind races. What's the threat? Who's coming? Are the spirits restless tonight? For a moment, the night feels alive, charged with unseen dangers and desperate urgency. Then silence falls again. You wait, breath held. Nothing moves. You try to convince yourself it was a false alarm. Just a careless ringing. But deep down, you know that in the Middle Ages, silence after a bell toll was even scarier. You hear the unmistakable thud of the heavy wooden door being barred from the inside. The bolt slides into place with a satisfying click, and you can almost feel the invisible shield settling over your home. Every night, this ritual repeats itself, locking out the dangers lurking beyond the walls. Medieval doors weren't just about keeping out the weather or nosy neighbors. They were your fortress against the dark's many threats, human and supernatural alike. You prop a sturdy chair against the door frame, not because you expect it to hold against a battering ram, but to add an extra layer of psychological comfort. Then there's the chalk marks, cryptic symbols, and strange scratches you notice etched above the doorway. These apotropaic marks were meant to confuse or trap evil spirits. Nobody could agree on exactly how they worked, but that never stopped people from drawing them with fervent belief. Windows, if you had any, were tiny and shuttered tight. Glass was a luxury. The shutters themselves were often crossed or nailed in patterns thought to repel witches. You imagine your neighbor's house, what symbols might be painted on their threshold. Is their protection stronger or weaker than yours? Iron nails and horseshoes feature heavily in these protections. Iron was believed to have the power to repel evil, confusing spirits and demons so they wouldn't enter. You might even find iron objects buried in thresholds or hung over windowsills. Sometimes, entire families would gather around the door after locking up, muttering prayers or chants, as if their voices could seal the barrier tighter than any bolt. Historians still argue whether these door rituals were more effective as psychological comfort or genuine spiritual defense. But in a world where the night hid dangers real and imagined, the line between the two was blurry. You rest your back against the door, feeling the solid wood cool against your spine. The night is outside, banging and whispering and waiting. But for now, you are safe, locked in a fortress of faith, iron, and hope. Outside your window, a shadow moves, a figure cloaked in darkness, lantern in hand. It's the night watchman, his footsteps muffled on the cobblestone street. His job, to patrol, to protect, and to remind the village that even in the darkest hours, someone is watching. You hear his voice rise and fall in a familiar chant, all's well, all's well. It's meant to soothe, to assure, to ward off fears. But sometimes, you wonder if it does the opposite. The watchman was a figure both respected and feared. He held the power to stop thieves, to break up fights, or to accuse a suspicious character. Yet, some whispered he used the cover of night to settle personal scores or spy on his neighbors. Being a night watchman wasn't glamorous. The hours were long and cold, and the dangers were many, from wild animals to angry drunks. But the role was essential. Without him, the village was vulnerable to fire, theft, and worse. Historians still debate how much actual security night watches provided. Did their loud calls and patrols prevent crime, or did they mostly serve as a psychological barrier against the unknown? Either way, their presence filled the night with an eerie rhythm. Tonight, as you listen, the watchman's footsteps draw near. You imagine his lantern casting long shadows, the glow flickering against ancient stone walls. All's well, he calls out again. You hope he's right. You toss and turn, caught in the restless grip of a dream. It's vivid too vivid. You're walking through a misty forest where the trees whisper secrets you don't understand. Suddenly, a shadow darts between the trunks, and your heart pounds so loud it wakes you up. Dreams in the Middle Ages were no ordinary nonsense. They were messages, divine warnings, prophetic visions, or sinister curses sent by malevolent forces. You couldn't ignore them. People believed that saints spoke through dreams, revealing hidden truths or guiding the faithful. But nightmares, those were often the work of demons, testing your faith or preparing you for misfortune. Priests might interpret your dreams, especially if they involved animals, colors, or numbers. A black dot in your dream. Trouble ahead. A white dove. But the meaning could change depending on your own life circumstances or recent sins. Some folks even kept dream books, collections of symbols and their supposed interpretations to decode the nighttime visions. But remember, dreams could be tricky. What warned one might bless another. Historians still argue whether medieval dream interpretations were spiritual guidance or just early psychology dressed in religious garb. Either way, your dreams kept you on edge. You sit up in bed, wiping sweat from your brow. The shadows on the wall look different now, less familiar, more threatening. You clutch your rosary tighter and whisper a prayer, hoping your next dream will be kinder. Sleep feels distant, like a fragile boat adrift on a stormy sea. You peek through a crack in the shutter, eyeing the moon, a pale, glowing orb hanging low in the sky. Its silver light bathes the village in an eerie glow. You want to light an outside lamp to chase away the darkness, but the church has warned against too much artificial light at night. Too much light, they say, attracts spirits, and worse yet, encourages sinful behavior. The soft glow of lamps, especially flickering candles outside homes, was often seen as a beacon for wandering souls and malevolent entities. Some believe the moon itself was a sign of mystery and magic, a time when the veil between worlds was thinnest. People relied mostly on small indoor lights and the occasional torch for night tasks, but they were cautious. To display light recklessly was to invite temptation or danger. In some villages, street lamps were forbidden after sunset. Instead, people whispered that walking by moonlight was safer, at least less likely to provoke spirits' ire. Historians still debate whether these restrictions were rooted in superstition, church doctrine, or simply practical concerns about fire hazards and resource conservation. You pull the shutters tight, casting your room back into darkness. You imagine the moonlight dancing on the rooftops, watching silently like an unblinking eye. And somewhere, in the shadows, you swear you see a flicker like a lantern moving slowly, purposefully, just out of sight. You pull the blanket over your head and close your eyes. Sometimes, darkness is better than what lurks in the light. You hear your grandmother muttering from the corner of the room, her voice low and steady, reciting the old superstitions passed down like precious heirlooms. Never point at the stars, she says, or you'll invite bad luck. Don't whistle indoors, or you'll call in the spirits. And for heaven's sake, never sleep with your feet pointing toward the door. These sayings weren't just quaint sayings, they were survival advice wrapped in folklore. Pointing at stars was thought to anger celestial beings or confuse fate. Whistling indoors was believed to summon evil winds or wandering souls. And sleeping with feet toward the door, that was an invitation for death or evil spirits to enter your body. Families lived by these rules, instilling caution into every action. Breaking them wasn't just bad manners, it was dangerous. Sometimes, you'd see people carrying small charms like rabbit's feet, carved bones, or woven thread stuck into pockets or sewn into garments to protect against these misfortunes. Superstitions shaped daily life like the rhythm of the seasons. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were remnants of older pagan traditions or practical ways to explain an unpredictable world. Whatever their origin, they left a deep mark on medieval culture. You watch your grandmother's fingers work the rosary beads, her voice a soft chant against the shadows. You feel comforted and wary all at once. The night is long, and the old ways persist, whispering in the dark corners of your mind. Finally, exhaustion pulls you under, and you surrender to the fragile embrace of sleep. But even then, your mind races with worries. Will your soul remain tethered to your body? Medieval folks believed the soul could wander during sleep, making one vulnerable to evil spirits or even being stolen. You clutch your amulet tighter, hoping it anchors you firmly in this world. The idea of a soul slipping away during the night wasn't just superstition, it was a very real concern. People believed that if the soul left, the body might become prey to wandering demons or worse. Sleep was a precarious state, a bridge between life and the unknown. Yet, despite all the fear, the human body craves rest. You drift deeper, navigating the shadows within your mind, battling nightmares conjured by the day's terrors. Historians still debate how much these fears shaped actual sleep practices versus being exaggerated tales. But the evidence is clear, nighttime was dangerous, both physically and spiritually. Outside, the wind sighs softly through the trees. The moon continues its silent vigil. The village sleeps, guarded by prayers, charms, and the hope that dawn will come. You finally close your eyes, letting the darkness carry you away, not with fear, but with the quiet comfort that the night will end, and the sun will rise again. The night stretches on, gentle now, the terrors softened by distance. Your breath slows, heavy eyes growing heavier still. The flickering candle is but a memory, the shadows have settled into peaceful shapes. The world outside remains dark, but within you, a quiet calm grows. All those fears, the ghosts, the demons, the restless souls, they fade into whispers, mere echoes of a distant time. You're safe here, in the cocoon of your bed, wrapped in warmth and soft blankets. The cold, the dangers, the unknown, they belong to another world, another time. Let your mind drift like a leaf on a slow-moving stream, carried effortlessly away from worries and shadows. Feel the steady rhythm of your heartbeat, a gentle drum guiding you deeper into rest. There's nothing to fear now. The night holds only peace. Imagine the first light of dawn, soft hues painting the sky, birdsong gently breaking the silence. You'll wake renewed, the dark is behind you. For now, surrender fully to the quiet, the stillness, the comfort of sleep. Good night, dear listener. Let the night cradle you gently. Sweet dreams.